Thomas Hobbes, A Life of Reason and Power, reading and published by Mr. Books. To traverse the winding corridors of human history is to encounter figures whose minds blazed like torches in the gloom of uncertainty. Among these, Thomas Hobbes stands as both philosopher and paradox, a man at once shaped by chaos and obsessed with order, whose every thought vibrated with the tension between reason and power. Born amidst the thunder of conflict and raised in a land riven by civil war, Hobbes embodied England's tempestuous 17th century. His childhood was neither idyllic nor ordinary. It was forged in the fires of fear. His mother, laboring under the terror of the approaching Spanish Armada, brought him shrieking into the world, a child destined to contemplate the terrors gnawing at the foundations of society. Hobbes would not merely observe the chaos of his times, he would dissect it, seeking truth and safety in the rigorous embrace of reason. But reason for Hobbes was never merely abstract. He saw in the tumult of political struggle and the brute realities of human ambition the outlines of power, untempered by wisdom. His vision of humanity fearful, hungry, rational, and dangerous echoes in the pages of his magnum opus, Leviathan, where he cast the state as a mortal god brooding over a subject, people desperate for peace. Each of his thoughts dripped with a deep awareness of the contradictions in our nature, our yearning for freedom, our craving for safety, and our need to be ruled. This journey through Thomas Hobbes' life is not simply an examination of a philosopher's works. It is a drama of intellect and emotion, ambition and vulnerability. It is the story of a frail, clever boy who became the architect of modern political thought. Hobbes was accused of heresy, threatened with excommunication, and scorned by rivals. Yet through every trial, he clung to reason as his shield and wielded his pen as a sword against the chaos threatening his world. Herein, hope and disillusion, power and submission, roar and whisper meet. In these pages, we will walk with Hobbes from the storms of his infancy, through the brilliance of his maturity, to the contentious legacy he imposed on generations to come. Through his eyes, we will see the world not as we wish it, but as it truly is, a domain in desperate need of the disciplines of reason and the uneasy balm of power. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button to support the channel. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss an audiobook that could change your life. Now, let's begin. Enjoy. Chapter 1. The Child Amidst Turmoil. Hobbes' Early Years. The winter air bit with an unrelenting chill in the English village of Westport, Wiltshire. In the shadow of war drums and looming invasion, a newborn's first cries agitated the silence. That infant was Thomas Hobbes, and the fear that accompanied his arrival would set the tone for his entire existence. His mother, caught between prayers and premonitions, as rumors of the Spanish Armada surged through the countryside, famously quipped that Fear and Thomas were twins. It is a legend that clings to the storyteller's craft, yet within it, there is truth. Thomas Hobbes was born to a world infected by anxiety. Young Thomas's childhood was spent under the heavy hand of disorder. His father, a vicar prone to brawls and controversy, abandoned his family after a violent quarrel, leaving the boy and his siblings to the care of more stable, if uninspired relatives. Hobbes' earliest memories, thus, were not awash with parental affection, but instead colored by a sense of vulnerability, a perpetual alertness to peril. Despite, or perhaps because of, this instability, the boy possessed a profoundly sharp mind. Every observation, every snatch of conversation seemed to etch itself indelibly into his consciousness. The centuries-old English landscape, its cloudy skies, stoic churches, the anxious faces of its people, became not just the backdrop of his youth, but the palette from which he would later draw his philosophical masterpieces. it is important to recognize the paradox beating at the heart of Hobbes's formation. As a child, he yearned for order in a world defined by disruption. His cousins recognized his talent and, against the grain of fortune, ensured his entry into a grammar school in Malmesbury. There, surrounded by texts and the clamor of young voices, Thomas's hunger for knowledge grew insatiable. Words became his shield, logic his fortress. Yet, while he excelled academically, Hobbes was not insulated from the emotional turmoil of his circumstances. The loss of his father, the social stigma it brought, and the ever-present aura of political violence did not pass without psychological residue. The need for safety, both emotional and physical, became a motif in his interior world, a motif he would never outgrow. In recalling these formative years, Hobbes later admitted to a deep sensitivity, a receptiveness to the suffering and struggles of others. His keen analytical mind, so often imagined as cold and mechanical, was underpinned by something fervently human, a longing to understand, and if possible, to master the cruel tides of fate. The seeds of Hobbes's philosophy were thus sown in childhood fears and intellectual longing. He read voraciously not only the classics, but the scriptures, histories, and tales that animated conversation in every corner of his milieu. The instability of England in his youth, a land racked by dynastic upheaval and religious acrimony, was more than historical fact to Hobbes. It was the living reality that pressed him to ask, why do people fight? What is the nature of power? And can the world, however scarred, ever know true peace? In these early chapters of his life, reason and power were not distant concepts, but daily necessities. To survive and to thrive, Thomas Hobbes learned, required not just cleverness, but also resilience. His story had begun, not with triumph, but with survival. It is a theme that would permeate every word he would later write and echo in the heart of his masterpiece. As if to whisper, understanding is the first step on the painful path from fear to power. Chapter 2. The Spark of Inquiry, Education, and the Birth of Philosophy. To be born into chaos is to crave the order of knowledge. This longing carried Thomas Hobbes from the anxiety of his youth to the hallowed gates of Magdalen Hall, Oxford, where the world first revealed itself to him as a vast and intricate puzzle waiting to be deciphered. The young Hobbes was little more than a boy when he set foot in the storied halls of academia, yet his presence would soon ripple through its ancient corridors. Oxford in the early 17th century was a place heavy with tradition, but emboldened by the first breezes of the Renaissance. Dry medieval disputations blended uneasily with rumors of new science and bold ideas. Hobbes found himself at the crossroads of old and new. He marveled at the classics. Aristotle's logical precision gave meat to the bones of his developing mind. Cicero's rhetoric, the music of argument, lent him voice, and the Stoics whispered of fortitude and fate. All this he absorbed with reverent passion, yet he chafed at dogmatism and the slow fossilization of thought. The spark of inquiry was not mere curiosity for Hobbes, it was an act of defiance. In every book, he sought the machinery behind the illusion, the anatomy beneath the skin of tradition. The world was not what it seemed, and truths, if they existed, did not glow in the abstractions of pious argument. Instead, Hobbes began to suspect that certainty lay buried beneath the shifting sands of custom and superstition. It was during these formative years at Oxford that Hobbes's emotional nature, so often obscured in later, sterner writings, emerged most tenderly. Letters from these years reveal a boy in awe of the world and simultaneously alone within it. He found solace in solitude, clarity in the pursuit of understanding, and a sense of belonging in the rhythm of rational contemplation. The tragedies of his childhood, though never far, faded into the periphery as he lost and found himself in study. Upon completing his degree, Hobbes's hunger for knowledge could not be sated by the dry, static order of English academia. His eyes turned to Europe, where Galileo studied the heavens and Descartes, prepared to doubt the world into submission. For a time, destiny intervened. Hobbes secured employment as tutor and companion to the Cavendish family. This role would define his social position for decades, granting him rare access to the aristocratic class and the intellectual ferment blossoming on the continent. As he traveled through France and Italy, his mind awakened to new possibilities. The bustling salons of Paris, the brilliant minds of Mersenne and Gassendi, and the audacious empirical work of Galileo inspired Hobbes to transcend the constraints of inherited tradition. He began to see philosophy not as the guardian of ancient truths, but as the means to create new knowledge from first-hand experience and rigorous reasoning. Emotionally, these years were a period of transformation. Hobbes fell in love with discovery, entranced by the logic of mathematics and the promise of science to bring clarity where once was only confusion. Yet in these moments of awakening, he was troubled by a simple, haunting question. If reason illuminated individual minds, why did it not illuminate society? Why, amidst the bloom of genius, did the world remain so fraught with war and darkness? The birth of Hobbes's philosophy was thus not the sterile labor of thought, but a passionate act born from his own wounds and yearnings. He would soon set himself against the great questions of his age, determined to fuse reason with power or see the world devoured by its absence. Chapter 3. Leviathan Awakens, the making of a masterpiece. The birth of Leviathan, the book that would define both Hobbes and the very contours of political philosophy, was as turbulent as the sea monsters invoked in its name. To read Leviathan is to plunge into the very heart of fear and hope. To understand its making is to witness the depths and heights of Hobbes's soul. By his early 50s, after years in the service of the Cavendish family and travels throughout Europe, Hobbes found himself at the epicenter of England's greatest convulsion, the Civil War. The streets ran red with blood, thrones trembled, loyalty shattered, and the world seemed poised to crumble. Every bell that tolled for a fallen soldier resonated with Hobbes's own early childhood anxieties. England, he felt, teetered not just on the edge of political disaster, but on the abyss of anarchy. Yet it was precisely in this storm, in the midst of national calamity, that Hobbes began his greatest work. The emotional stakes were staggering. He wrote not from the comfort of detachment, but from the feverish urgency of a man who saw civilization itself slipping away. Philosophers, he believed, could no longer afford the luxury of idle abstraction. Their words must build bulwarks against the tide. Leviathan was not composed as a treatise, so much as a lifeline, a synthetic, fiery work that stitched together decades of speculation, observation, and existential dread. Hobbes's pen danced with a sense of holy mission, as if every line were a spell to ward off the demons of war. He drew upon mathematics, physics, theology, and poetry, melding them into a new science of society. Mankind, he argued, was a creature of appetites and fears, not ideals. Peace would not flower from brotherly love, but from the iron discipline of a sovereign authority vast enough to terrify even the boldest hearts. The Leviathan, that monstrous power, raised by common consent to subdue the chaos within us, was both an act of imagination and a confession of necessity. Hobbes wrote with anguish and awe. The sovereign, whether king or assembly, would be the bulwark against the war of all against all. Hobbes made no apologies for his realism. In The State of Nature, he wrote, "Life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. There was no beauty in this world except the beauty found in order forcibly upheld." But how harrowing it must have been for Hobbes to hold this mirror to humanity. He loved learning, honored friendship, and yet saw, in every human gesture the seeds of contention, rivalry, and fear. The act of writing Leviathan broke his heart and fortified his will. As he scribbled beneath the flicker of candlelight, distant cannon boomed, and he wondered if reason would triumph or vanish beneath the tumult of history. When Leviathan emerged in 1651, it was both an intellectual earthquake and a personal risk. Hobbes did not seek to flatter power, he sought, with trembling passion, to save men from their own worst angels. The book unleashed controversy that would burn and mark him for the rest of his life. But for Hobbes, there was no alternative. To remain silent was to surrender humanity to mutual destruction. Leviathan was, therefore, not just a treatise, but a monument to hope battered by experience, a monument to a man who believed that reason, however battered, could yet forge a fragile peace atop the storms of power. Chapter 4: War, Fear, and the State of Nature. If Hobbes's legacy has a pulse, it beats strongest in his description of the state of nature, a world where civilization collapses and man returns to his most primal self. To understand Hobbes is to feel the cold wind of that world, to tremble with the dread that haunted Hobbes's dreams. In the state of nature, war is not event, but condition, not the clash of armies, but the normal state of mankind shorn of authority. Hobbes was merciless in his description, as if to evoke fear not as a weakness, but as an essential, clarifying truth. Imagine, he urged us, a world without government, without law, where no common power exists to hold men in awe. Reason becomes a tool for survival, untempered by empathy. Distrust is instinct, and every person becomes a potential enemy. The emotional impact of such a hypothetical world is devastating, where some philosophers imagined human nature as noble and good. Hobbes found only vulnerability, competition, and self-defense. His own terror, born in the chaos of his childhood and reaffirmed by the violence of his adult years, bled into the text. He did not shrink from the conclusion: life in this state is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. It is impossible to exaggerate the courage required to face such a conclusion. Beneath Hobbes's clinical language lies a trembling heart. He knew that his vision of mankind would invite scorn from those who still believed in our native innocence. But Hobbes, gazing into the abyss, gave voice to the fear that lurks in every anxious glance, every closed door, every fortress wall. This was not mere pessimism, it was, for Hobbes, the operating premise of political philosophy. Yet, even as he dwelled on humanity's cruelty, Hobbes illuminated our potential for transcendence. For within every individual, he recognized a spark of reason, a capacity to recognize the dangers of unbridled anarchy and to seek peace. It was this rational awareness, not any inherent virtue, that made political society possible. Men are compelled by self-preservation to strike a bargain. I lay aside my right to all things, if you will do likewise. Thus, the social contract is born not from love, but from terror, not from virtue, but from prudence. Underlying Hobbes's bleak vision is a profound empathy. He saw in the figure of every frightened child, every wounded soldier, every desperate parent, the same yearning he had known, the desire to live free from the constant threat of violence. The state of nature, with its endless cycles of fear and retribution, was the nightmare he sought to awaken the world from. Hobbes's emotional intensity radiates from the pages of Leviathan as both warning and pleading. He did not believe that reason alone could bind men to peace. It required the enormous and always precarious power of the state. Yet even as he shaped his terrifying vision of nature, he offered hope. If we have the courage to confront what we are, we may yet choose to become something better together. Chapter 5. Sovereignty and the Spectre of Power. The world, according to Hobbes, could never long thrive without a central authority of overwhelming power, a Leviathan whose command inspires reverence, if not love. Sovereignty, in Hobbesian thought, is at once the apex of human collective achievement and the shadow that haunts our freedom. In his hands, the concept of sovereignty becomes not just a political theory, but an existential drama, vibrant with contradiction and yearning. The emotional heart of Hobbes's argument is this: without a sovereign power, humanity is condemned to circle endlessly in the wilderness of distrust and enmity. Sovereignty must therefore be absolute, indivisible, inescapable, a bulwark constructed by our mutual agreement, yet towering above us, as awe-inspiring and feared as any primeval god. Hobbes' vision of the sovereign is arresting in its blend of terror and hope. Every shiver in his pen seems to echo with the dread of a world undone. He does not soften the truth. To forge peace, power must be centralized, and individual will constrained. The Leviathan, artificial, immense, crowned not by divine right, but by our own desperate compacts, exists to keep the peace and dispense justice with an impartial hand. Yet however rational this system, it is underpinned by a well of emotion. Hobbes' sovereign is both protector and jailer. We cede our rights to this power, not in joyous expectation, but in trembling necessity. Our yearning for security conflicts eternally with our hunger for equality and autonomy. The satisfaction of one need is always haunted by the ghost of what is lost. It is in this emotional crucible that Hobbes' brilliance shines most fiercely. Other thinkers built states upon imagined virtues. Hobbes built his upon wounds, upon the lived realities of betrayal and violence. He trusted reason to reveal the need for order and power to enforce its rule. He saw that no law, however elegant, could bind men without the threat of force. The sovereign, then, is not just an institution, but the focal point of our collective hope and collective anxiety. But the spectre of sovereignty brings its own price. Hobbes, who had lost so much to the chaos of ungoverned passions, knew the danger of concentrated power. He argued that the sovereign could be a single monarch or a body of rulers, but its authority must be undivided. If the Leviathan were to falter, if dissent were allowed to fracture its unity, then all would collapse, and the state of nature would return in blood and ashes. Hobbes believed that only by bowing to power could men find peace. But he did not find this easy indeed. His own heart quaked with the knowledge of what must be sacrificed. In the end, sovereignty is a pact with necessity, a price paid in freedom for shelter from the storm. Chapter 6. Humanity in Chains, Freedom and Authority. Freedom, the word shimmers with promise and crackles with danger. For Hobbes, freedom was not the spontaneous, boundless liberty that the human heart craves, but something more exacting and less intoxicating, a delicate balance, forever teetering on the edge of dissolution. Authority, though necessary, felt to Hobbes like a chain, both salvation and sacrifice. The emotional tumult of this tension throbs through Hobbes' thought. His own life, always shadowed by the risk of persecution, the sting of exile, and the threat of censorship, taught him that freedom was never absolute. Men, he felt, misconstrued liberty as the right to do whatever they wished, when in truth, such anarchy invites only the reign of terror. For Hobbes, true freedom exists only under the guidance of a strong, impartial authority, freedom within order, not from it. This is where Hobbes' emotional and intellectual honesty shined. He did not peddle easy dreams. He declared, with all the courage and pain of a man cheated by the world, that the longing for unchecked liberty is itself a path to ruin. Authority is the necessary constraint, that transforms the chaos of individual passions into the harmony of civil society. He wrote with the ache of one who had witnessed loss, betrayal, violence. The freedom men claim for themselves is often the prelude to tyranny over others. Laws, for Hobbes, are not shackles, but shields protection against the infinite, devouring ambitions of all against all. But if his account of freedom is bleak, it is also fiercely hopeful. Hobbes recognized that within the cage of law, we are safer, truer, more ourselves than in the free-for-all of unrestrained desire. He saw that we must cede some liberties to preserve our collective well-being, and that in this act, we dignify what remains of our autonomy. The sovereign's laws may bind us, but they also lift from our shoulders the constant weight of fear. This understanding was deeply personal. Hobbes's relationships with his patrons were fraught with unspoken suspicions and the perpetual threat of falling from favor. He lived in a world where the wrong word could mean disgrace or worse. The sacrifices he made, the self-censorship and endless calculation, were not theoretical. He felt the chains keenly, even as he acknowledged their necessity. In the end, Hobbes led us to the hard, bright truth at the heart of political life. Freedom can live only within the discipline of shared authority. We must accept our bonds and find in them, paradoxically, the peace of mind and the glimmer of hope that makes life endurable. Chapter 7. Against the tides, enemies, dissent, and the flames of controversy. The fire was always close, licking at the edges of Hobbes's name. As Leviathan slithered from the press, slathered in ink and ideas too raw for his times, enemies coalesced: philosophers, theologians, and monarchists, all seeing in his writings a threat to the delicate order they defended. Hobbes, no stranger to fear, watched the reaction to his masterpiece with a peculiar blend of pride and dread. The immediate aftermath of Leviathan's publication brought forth a maelstrom. Clergymen branded him as an atheist. Oxford scholars recoiled, calling him impious, a heretic breathing fire against both church and state. The comfortable friendships Hobbes had cultivated over years grew strained. Even those who had admired his reason flinched from his doctrine that the sovereign, be he king or assembly, was the necessary iron in civilization's chaotic soul. The Restoration period, fevered and unstable, intensified the heat. Accusations swirled that he had laid the ideological groundwork for regicide, that his mechanistic worldview stripped humanity of its sacred order. Hobbes's own safety was not assured. It is said he burned much of his private correspondence, ever wary of persecution. The specter of heresy charges haunted him. Even in his advanced age, the old philosopher was forced to thread the needle between the warring claims of parliamentarians and royalists, never quite trusted by either. But it was not just political enemies Hobbes faced, it was philosophical dissent that cut deepest. The natural philosophers of England, men like Robert Boyle and John Bramhall, mounted relentless campaigns against Hobbes's materialism. They decried his vision of nature as matter in motion, fearing it drained divinity from the cosmos and reduced human beings to automata. Boyle accused Hobbes of undermining experimental science, while Bramhall launched pamphlet wars over free will and determinism. The battle spilled into print, the currency of intellectual warfare in the age of pamphleteers. Each rebuttal Hobbes crafted was imbued with a wounded dignity, a desperate plea for reason amid rhetorical violence. Yet, as the attacks mounted, Hobbes himself grew increasingly isolated, his salons of the past replaced by the heavy hush of exile, suspicion, and intellectual solitude. Even as he lived, his books were periodically censored, banned, or burned. Yet, they could not be silenced. The flames of controversy shaped Hobbes. They hardened his thought, sharpened the steel of his argument. His response was not retreat, but a doubling down, a restatement of his core principle that only a strong, undivided sovereignty could protect society from the bloodthirsty state of nature. He pointed to the wars ravaging Europe, the endless cycles of reprisal and rebellion, as vindication of his thesis. "Fear and I were twins," Hobbes once declared, and the world did little to prove him wrong. Even so, Hobbes was not unbending. Late in life, when confronted by the relentless force of his critics, he softened some arguments, privately conceding the dangers of unaccountable power. He wrote poetry, translated Homer, and attempted to reclaim a lost innocence in the classics, even as the fires of controversy around Leviathan never truly died. But the truest wounds were personal. The ostracization he felt from the world of letters, the pointed absences from banquets and gatherings, the silences from once close friends, these weighed upon Hobbes's spirit. Yet, as the years wore on, he seemed to accept the cross he bore, that of the controversialist, the necessary lightning rod for dangerous ideas. In his embattled later years, Hobbes embodied the very paradox he theorized: the need for peace won at the cost of liberty, the high price paid for security against chaos. He lived to see his works labeled pestilence, yet he also saw a generation of thinkers who could not ignore the questions he had forced into the open. His life thus became a living argument, contested, assaulted but unyielding. In the flames of dissent, Hobbes's philosophy endured, each attack sharpening rather than dulling its edge. And as Europe inched towards its modern age, those very flames would light the way for the next great debates about power, freedom, and the future of humanity. Chapter 8: Cast in Shadow, Hobbes's Enduring Legacy and the Modern Mind. In the twilight of Hobbes's life, and even more so after his passing, his presence lingered like a spectre in the chambers of philosophy, law, and politics. The world moved on, yet the shadow of Leviathan stretched across centuries, touching realms Hobbes could scarcely have imagined. What then is the true legacy of a man so often reviled in his time? The first echoes were reactions. In the years following Hobbes's death, philosophers both lauded and lambasted his ideas. John Locke, though often positioned as Hobbes's ideological foil, built upon Hobbes's conceptions of the state of nature, liberty, and government by consent, even as he challenged Hobbes's bleak conclusion. Enlightenment thinkers grappled with Hobbes's mechanistic understanding of humanity, seeing in it both a template and a warning. For every Voltaire who rejected Hobbesian pessimism, there was a Rousseau who transformed Hobbes's state of nature into a paean for human goodness. Hobbes's vision of sovereignty, of a power above all, capable of imposing peace, became a foundational stone in the construction of the modern state. Political theorists found themselves compelled to wrestle with his arguments, whether molding them into the framework of liberal democracy or marshalling them as a critique of tyranny. The right of the sword, the ultimate authority he described, would inform the emergence of constitutional monarchies and inspire fierce debates over the balance of order and liberty. His influence, though, seeped even deeper. In law, the very notion of the social contract became a scaffold for ideas of citizenship, rights, and the obligations between ruler and ruled. In the dark years of revolution, both defenders of the old order and architects of the new grappled with Hobbes. In the world's reckoning with totalitarianism and despotism, Leviathan was ever present, a warning and a cipher, invoked by those seeking both to justify and to resist the concentration of power. But perhaps nowhere did Hobbes's legacy burn brighter or more controversially than in the science of the mind. His materialist view anticipated the rise of psychology, cognitive science, and even neuroscience. The idea that thought is rooted in physical processes, that the mind is an engine of sensation, foreshadowed the gradual dethronement of metaphysics in favor of empirical investigation. And yet, his focus on fear as the fundamental driver of action, his bleakness about human nature, remains deeply unsettling. The 20th and 21st centuries brought Hobbes back into focus. Hobbesian themes emerge in the grainy films of world wars, in the rhetoric of the Cold War, in the uneasy balance of security and freedom in surveillance states. Scholars debated whether humanity had indeed escaped the war of all against all, or whether, as Hobbes warned, the state's iron fist remained the price we paid for fragile peace. Hobbes's impact is not only institutional, but also psychological. His insights into anxiety, violence, and the intractability of conflict continue to haunt literature, art, and everyday speech. The Leviathan has become a metaphor, invoked in crises from the halls of government to the digital battlegrounds of the internet, where anonymity breeds the same primal war Hobbes described centuries ago. And yet, there is hope interwoven with his darkness. Modern readers find in Hobbes not just a diagnosis, but also a challenge to seek the foundations upon which true peace might rest. His relentless rationality, his refusal to flinch from uncomfortable truths, inspires a spirit of inquiry and courage. The very controversies that dogged him have become sites of creative tension, pushing subsequent generations to ask uncomfortable but necessary questions. What degree of power is justified to prevent chaos? Can liberty flourish beneath authority, or must the two forever be at odds? What is the price of security in an uncertain world? Through the looking glass of time, Thomas Hobbes is neither hero nor villain. He is both torchbearer and warning signal, forever urging us to examine the balance we strike between fear and hope, power and reason. In the final reckoning, Hobbes' shadow endures not because he answered all questions, but because he forced humanity to confront them. His life embroiled in controversy, forged in fear, animated by a passion for peace, stands as testament to the uneasy compromises at the heart of civilization. The world he feared, the world he hoped for, remain with us. In every debate about order and anarchy, in every tremor of unrest and every sigh for security, the Leviathan stirs, casting long, ambiguous shadows over the world he helped to shape. If you found this video helpful, inspiring, or entertaining, don't forget to hit that like button. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on future content. Your support means the world. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.